Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. The government should stop allowing pre-tax contributions to accounts like the 401k and the IRA. At least that's the argument put forth by a couple economists in a recent research paper. The basic premise of this paper is that these employer-sponsored retirement plans have failed to resolve the retirement crisis. They've failed to help employees save more for their own retirement. In light of our current Social Security system being underfunded, they suggest that we should further restrict the usage of these plans in terms of the dollar amounts that can go into them and even what these accounts could grow to. That way the government could further capture more tax revenue and then could take this tax revenue to use it to prop up the Social Security system. And we've all seen the headlines about the shortfalls with Social Security, so there's absolutely issues here that need to be addressed. That's very apparent. But honestly, I was kind of shocked with this recommendation that came out as a way to prop up the system. This table shows the foundation for the author's argument. They say that in total, all of these tax-advantaged employer-sponsored accounts add up to a total of almost $185 billion of lost tax revenue for the government. And that's probably an important point to consider. For ourselves as individuals, when we use these tax-advantaged accounts, we see it from the perspective of tax savings. We use a Roth, we get to allow our dollars to grow completely tax-free, because we're using money we've already paid taxes on. If we use a traditional, we get to allow those dollars to grow tax deferred. We one day pay taxes on those distributions, as opposed to, say, a traditional brokerage account where we pay taxes on an annual basis. The tax savings to us represents lost tax revenue to the government. And while predominantly this article does attack the traditional 401k and the traditional IRAs, they also acknowledge that there's lost revenue due to Roth accounts, due to their tax-free growth. The author suggests that since the loss of revenues produced by a tax expenditure reduces government saving, the question is whether people covered by retirement plans increase their savings by enough to make up for this loss. The weight of the evidence indicates that they do not. So basically, in layman's terms, are people using these tax-advantaged accounts as an opportunity to save more money than they otherwise would, to set themselves up to be in a better position to fund their own retirement years, have a less of a reliance on government programs? And the authors say the answer is a hard no. The authors point out our lackluster savings rate in this country, which outside of the pandemic often hovers around 5% or so, which is well below the professional recommendations of 10 to 15% or so. And according to NerdWallet, the typical employee is putting just 6.4% of their pay into their company 401k. But let's not forget that the typical employer matches 4%, and this would give the average employee a savings rate of 10.4%. We truly can't discredit the power of the employer match. Let's say you make the median household income of about $75,000 a year. You work for an employer who has a 4% match. You invest in a way to capture that full employer match. In this case, it's $3,000. That amount alone, simply invested over a 40-year working career, is almost $850,000. Not having access to these plans would remove this access to an employer match. And it is this employer match and the ability to allow your money to grow tax-free or tax-deferred over time, over an entire working career, that incentivizes employees to use these plans. But the authors say that these incentives aren't enough, that the only people really using these plans are people who would otherwise be saving and investing anyhow. They'd just be using, say, a traditional taxable brokerage account. But it might be worth noting that only 35% of Americans have any investments outside of a retirement tax-advantaged account. So it doesn't seem like we can simply say that the only people using these tax-advantaged employer-sponsored retirement accounts are the exact same ones that would otherwise be investing outside of their employer plans. Consider that as of 2023, 73% of civilian workers had access to employer-sponsored retirement plans, but notably, only 56% of workers participated in these plans. The authors rightfully point out that as income increases, the participation in these types of plans increases, and from that data, they make the claim that these plans primarily benefit the wealthy and leave out the middle and the working class. Yes, as you make money, it's easier to save money. When your income's quite low, it can be difficult to find room in your budget to put money towards saving and investing. But arguably, when your income's lower and you're struggling to find money in your budget to put towards investments, it could actually be easier to contribute to a traditional 401k than it is to, say, contribute to a Roth 401k. And this is specifically the type of plan that the authors are against. It's easier to contribute because your contributions are made on a pre-tax basis. Let's look at a quick example. Let's say you have an income of $30,000 a year. If you contribute 10% of your paycheck to a traditional 401k, each month your take-home pay would be about $2,000 after your contribution. However, if you contributed to a Roth 401k, while your take-home pay would be over $2,000, after contributing to your Roth, you'd be left with about $1,900, a smaller paycheck than if you had gone with the traditional. And if you're in a position where literally every dollar of your paycheck matters, that can make a difference. Now, this is not an argument for or against the Roth. I think both the traditional and the Roth variety accounts are wonderful, and they both have their time and place. And I actually have a video that discusses them in more detail. It's simply to say that if you're in a situation where every dollar matters, contributing to a traditional 401k can allow you to save more while also being left with a bigger paycheck to work with. So limiting the options on these plans and limiting their availability could actually hurt middle and lower income earners. The authors also imply that it's simply wealthy Americans who are taking advantage of these 401k accounts for their tax advantages, not middle America. And if we look at the average account balances, maybe it gives a skewed picture of how much people actually have in these accounts. When we look at the median account balances, we get a more realistic picture that is the common everyday American that is utilizing these accounts to prep for retirement. Yes, I do believe the wealthy are taking full advantage of these accounts, but I also believe that middle Americans are utilizing these accounts to their benefits as well, and removing access to these plans would actually hurt the people that the author is trying to claim to help. And here's where I think the study has its greatest fault. The traditional 401k was introduced in 1978. It wasn't until 3 years later, in 1981, that the IRS actually allowed employees to fund these accounts with payroll deductions. These plans were an attempt to be a solution as more companies were moving away from defined benefit plans, think pensions, and more towards defined contribution plans, where employees are putting primarily the majority of contributions into these accounts. And just because the 401k was introduced in 1978 doesn't mean every company automatically had a 401k plan available. They still don't today. But we have to keep in mind, it's 2024. That was just 46 years ago. That's almost a typical worker's working time horizon. So we're just now seeing people retiring who had access to some of the very first 401k plans. When you think of it like that, the 401k is relatively young. And also consider that when it first came out, as I said, it wasn't widely available and it wasn't immediately available. And even where it was available, workers had to be educated on what it was. This generation of retirees were really the newbies to the 401k world. They were the test subjects for this plan. They had to learn on the fly, and they had to learn with access to way less financial information. There was no internet, there was no smartphones, there was no computers in the vast majority of homes. If you wanted to learn about finance, you had to go to the library or you had to know someone who knew about financial matters. So it seems these authors are a bit short-sighted and prematurely saying, oh, we tried these 401k plans. They just don't seem to work. Between 1980 and 1983, 401k plan participation rates were just at 13% where plans were available. Nowadays, we do see that figure is above 50%, but it is still worth noting that only 3/4 of workers actually have access to these types of plans. I do think these figures are still low, but it does show that we're making progress. I think it actually took time for people to understand what a 401k was and actually want to participate. And this dialogue continues to this day, because let's face it, as a society, we don't do a great job at communicating to our younger generations the importance of starting investing right away. We should be telling everyone to invest right away from the time they get their very first paycheck. That would make the road to wealth much easier. But it's definitely not something we've done well in the past. Now, point blank, I am a fan of all of these account types. 401ks, IRAs, 403bs, TSPs. I think they're all wonderful, traditional and Roth variety. I think they all have their place. And if you're in a situation where you have access to one of these plans, I absolutely think you should take advantage of it. I think it's a smart strategic move for you to save for your own retirement, and these account plan types make it a more favorable environment to do so. Under the new Secure 2.0 Act, beginning in 2025, employers with new 401k and 403b plans must automatically enroll employees when they become eligible. I think these auto-enroll features and these auto-escalation features that are becoming more and more common and soon to become mandatory on these plans are going to make people more successful when it comes to using these plans to plan for their future. Now, sure, the authors didn't fully suggest abolishing these plans altogether. They did suggest limiting total contribution between employee and employer to no more than $10,000 or $20,000 a year, or even limiting the amounts that these accounts could grow to on a tax-deferred basis, to say maybe $500,000 or $1 million, at which point the authors suggest that you would have to start paying taxes on any amounts beyond that point. Again, the whole goal of this would be to capture more tax revenue that could then be used to help fund the Social Security program. And I think this is misguided at best. Yes, Americans have a saving problem, but we don't solve that problem by making it harder to save, by putting more obstacles in the way to saving money. Clearly, the authors are very against employer-sponsored plan types in all of their forms, but the other glaring issue at play is Social Security. And yes, it does have issues, and yes, they do need to be addressed. Personally, I would be more of a fan of addressing the cap on wages that are taxed for Social Security purposes without increasing benefit payouts. That too represents billions of dollars of lost revenue, or something along those lines. But I certainly don't think trying to create an obstacle to people's ability to save is a way to solve the problem. We also want to make sure to think about it from the perspective of every economic decision we make has intended consequences and unintended consequences. And if you've ever read the Freakonomic books, they address this and they're absolutely wonderful. So hypothetically, let's say we actually adopt the author's suggestion here. We limit access to employer-sponsored plans to help prop up Social Security. What if that tax revenue doesn't get used as it's intended? What if it doesn't fix the problem? Then we send a whole group of retirees into retirement with a question mark hanging above Social Security still, but we've also sent them into retirement with less money in their own personal savings than they otherwise would have had. That seems like a really bad plan. Let me know what your thoughts are. Share them in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon.